No problem. Okay, Full Stack Web 13. We are in a new week, single page applications, and we're going to be learning today about React Router. Today and tomorrow, we'll be focusing on routing, and then the rest of the week will be focused on HTTP and AJAX calls. So fun week. This is kind of a turning point in our learning where we actually get to create like applications that feel real, if that makes any sense. So, and you'll see what I mean as we get further into this, but you'll be able to click around to different pages, and we'll be pulling data from servers, and you guys will be setting up those API calls. So it definitely starts to feel more like real world stuff here starting today. So let's talk about React Router. We're going to be discussing the difference between client-side routing and server-side routing. And actually, before we even jump into that, we'll talk about what routing even is. And then we'll learn about adding React Router to an application and describing the route component so that we can set up routes within our app, and then creating dynamic routes using URL parameters. Okay, so what is routing? Can everybody give me a good short sentence on what routing even is? So what is routing, and why is it important to us as developers? Oh, good, relaying something somewhere. So yeah, I kind of like that. It's vague, but it's a good explanation of what we're doing. Close. It can be done this way. Routing can be done with a call from the browser to the server, and we're going to learn about that way of routing, and we're actually going to be doing our routing differently, where we don't make a call to a server. Oh, good. An endpoint to retrieve a different data set from the same HTML files. Okay, yep, that goes kind of along the same lines as here. So yeah, we'll discuss that path selection. Routing technically just calls state and apply that data with new styling based off of I assume this is the URL. So good, Patrick, I like that a lot. So routing is basically the idea that when you go from one URL to a different URL, that based on what the URL is, we're going to display something different, and we're going to have different data available to our components for that page. So if we just look at, let's go to lambdaschool.com. And right now we're at this URL. This is what's known as a base URL for this website. So when you see .com, .io, something, and you don't have / something else out here, then you're at the base URL. And you'll notice that even in my Chrome, this part out here is grayed out. It's not black like the base URL is. So we're at the base URL. If we were to route to a different URL, so let's go to about, then you'll notice we're at a different URL. And based on this URL, we routed somewhere else in the website. So we could go to blog, and now we're at a different URL and we have different content coming up. So last week we saw one way of displaying different content based on whether or not we were logged into our site. Today we're going to learn how to display different content solely based on what is up here in the browser URL. And what's cool is we're going to determine this beforehand, what the URL is and what content shows. We're not going to be watching the URL and watching for changes here and then displaying things. We're going to declare it all beforehand so we know exactly what to expect. So as you click around here, you can see there are lots of different routes on this page. What happens if we click down here to careers? Okay, so we've got some more. Is there? Okay, so here's a good one. So we can, if we click on tracks, oh, but it's not going to let us do that. So if we go to full stack web here, we can see that there's even the possibility of creating these long strings of the URL. And we'll learn about this a little bit more tomorrow, how we can do different things just solely based on the part of this URL that we're creating. Okay, so this page, this website, lambdaschool.com, is what's known as a single page application. And what that means is that this website is being served up from the server, and all the data that it needs, most of the data that it needs, is being served up, and as we switch between pages, as we go to the About page or the blog page, the browser already has a lot of what it needs to display these different pages. And so when we click and we go to the About page, we're actually not making a server call, a call to the server to bring up this new HTML page. The browser already has what it needs from that first initial load when we first went to lambdaschool.com to build out these different routes. And that is going to be how we create our websites, how we create our applications. But let's talk about kind of the difference between doing it this way and doing it, which is called client-side rendering, and then doing it how was mentioned a couple times with server-side rendering. So there is a difference, and with our React apps, we're going to be using what's called client-side routing. So this is a really good image right here to show us what the difference is. So traditionally, how things were set up when the internet was first being created and when we first got websites and browsers were not very powerful. And so web developers relied a lot on the server doing a lot of the heavy lifting and compiling HTML files and pages from with all the JavaScript and CSS that they needed, and then serving that up to the computer, to the browser. And so before browsers became more powerful, these types of websites that had the traditional server-side rendering were, this is just how things were done. So what would happen is someone would go to a website, and we'll go to, let's go to Facebook. because I believe as we go to a different thing here, okay, yep. Okay, so as we load up the page, we go to facebook.com. Oh, good. Thanks, John Bryant. That's perfect. As we go to a page like the marketplace, the client, the browser, is creating an initial request to the server, and the server is loading some HTML to the client. And then when we click to a different page, like if we go to, we'll just go back to me here. So as we click to different parts of this app, then the client makes a request back to the server, and the server will serve up a new HTML page, and you'll see the page reloads, and it loads this new HTML page. So if I go back to Marketplace, you'll notice that the page is reloading, and we're making these requests to the server, and the server is putting together an HTML page and serving that HTML page back up to the browser. This is what's called server-side rendering. So the server, in this case, is in charge of rendering the data for this HTML page. Now this is different in a single page application, which we're going to be building with React. And you're going to ask me, well, why are we using Facebook as an example when React, the Facebook's framework is made with single page applications? The reason we're using Facebook is most of their routing from one main page to a different main page is done on the server side, is done like this. But we'll see in just a second that now when we route within the marketplace, that it's going to be done with single page application, with SPA cycle. So let's take a look at that. We've seen this where we load facebook.com, we click on marketplace, or we load facebook.com, the server serves up some HTML. We click on marketplace, and the server renders and serves up another HTML, and the page reloads at that time. Right, so if I click on me again, watch up here, you'll see the spinner. So the page is reloading, and we go back to there. And then the marketplace, same thing happens. Okay, so now let's take a look at what happens within a single page application. So a single page application is a little bit different. We get the initial request, and the server serves up the HTML. So that part is the same. Then we make an AJAX call, and we just get some JSON served back to us. So if we click somewhere, for example, if I click on groups, we're making an AJAX call, but we're not asking for HTML to be rendered and served up like we are up here. We're just asking for data because the client on this initial request got all the HTML pages it needed for different routes within the marketplace. So it already has everything it needs to render this HTML. It just needs a little bit of extra JSON data. So if we go to selling, you'll notice there's no page reload, even though there's a spinner here. That spinner means we're making an AJAX call, but we're not waiting for the server. We're not reloading the page and waiting for the server to render our application. The client is going to take care of that. Let's go to one more. Let's go to buying. So you saw the spinner up there. The React app inside the marketplace was waiting for this AJAX call to happen, but it already had everything it needed to render the page for us. So we didn't have to reload the page. Okay, that was quite a bit there. Do you guys have any questions on that whole thing here? So what is AJAX? That's a really good question. We're actually going to get into that on Wednesday, but just a quick explanation is that AJAX is a request from our browser to a server for data, and that can be a request for an HTML page like up here, or it can be a request for just some JSON data like this is down here. Yep, that's correct. We'll be using Axios. Okay, so is this because the number of changes between one site section and another are so numerous that there would be no advantage to utilizing the virtual DOM? Said another way, going from one site section to another is expensive no matter what. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure that is why Facebook made the choice to do that between different parts of their app. So yeah, that's a good question. Don't worry, guys, if you don't understand this. This is a good advanced question, but you don't have to understand this for what we're going to be learning today. That's a good question, Michelle. So when we are looking up here, she said, why is this lighter than doing something like this? So at some point when we're changing routes, when we're going from buying to browse, we have to render something. We have to render out our HTML to the DOM, right? I mean, we're changing routes. You can see up here in the URL, things are changing. We're not reloading the page because this is a single page application. But nonetheless, we still have to render something to the DOM for our users. So that is a pretty heavy process, that taking an HTML page and rendering everything, getting it ready to render to the DOM. Before browsers became as powerful as they are today, the most efficient way to do that was on the server. And so the server was in charge traditionally of looking at the URL and saying, okay, I'm at marketplace/groups, so I need to render out this HTML here on the DOM. And it would get that ready for the DOM. It would serve that up in HTML format, and then it would give that back to the browser. The browser, in order to actually render it to the DOM, would have to reload the page and reload the HTML that it had already. So so since that point, we now have really powerful browsers, and we don't have to leave that load up to the server. We can now take care of all of that in the browser. And when we go from /groups to /buying, our browser is now fast enough to get the new HTML page ready to render and put it on the DOM. But we don't want to, usually between routes, there's some data that we still need to fetch from the database. And so API calls to our server and database still need to happen to fetch that extra data. So yes, compiling an HTML file and getting it ready for the DOM is a lot heavier than just saying, oh, you need a list of what the user has been looking for and purchasing, and then send that list back in JSON format. This is way lighter and way easier than finding that data anyways and then compiling HTML. So really good question. Yep, all good things, Patrick. Patrick's drinking the Kool-Aid. Okay, so Andrew says, if I'm understanding correctly, the browser downloads all the HTML needed in advance and serves up what's needed based on what the JSON instructs it to. Yeah, so the browser already has all the HTML it needs, and we're going to learn how to get that ready for the client, for the browser. And then based on what endpoint, what URL we're at, it's going to determine, our programs will determine, we as developers get to determine if we need to make an AJAX call for more data. So if I go from marketplace / whatever this number is to groups, then me as the developer, I get to decide, okay, do I want to, when I go to marketplace, do I want to bring all the data I need for groups on that initial call? Or do I want to wait till someone clicks on groups and make an additional AJAX call for additional data? So we get to decide how much data we're going to get off our initial request, and then how much we're going to make AJAX calls later, depending on what users are clicking on. Man, really good questions today, guys. This is awesome. This is really good. And hopefully I am keeping answers brief enough, but still answering questions. Is a single page application usually preferable, or are there situations where it's overkill? What's the best use case for a single page app? That is a perfect segue into what we wanted to talk about next. So why would we have, are there still use cases for server-side rendering, and what are the best use cases for single page applications? So it kind of comes down to a couple things. The biggest strengths of using server-side rendering still is something called SEO, search engine optimization. So when I go to Google and I type in a search for anything, so if we go to Google and we type in, go to Google, there we go, and I type in, what is SEO? It's going to go to its databases, go through all its algorithms, and it's going to curate a list of websites that it's going to show me on the list down here. So there are situations where when you're building an application, that it's really important for your company to be listed as high up in this list as possible. And we do that through search engine optimization, through SEO. And I won't get into what the specifics of that, but I will tell you that if you are using server-side rendering, it's a lot easier to accomplish that goal. Search engine optimization is a lot easier through server-side rendering. So if that's important, if you're selling running shoes, if I type in men's running shoes, and you want to be at the top of this list, so if we go past all the ads, we see that runningwarehouse.com has done a really good job at their SEO, their search engine optimization. They're the #1 on the list. If this is important to your company, then you'll more than likely do more server-side rendering. If this is not as important to your company, then I would suggest you build out single-page applications. A couple other just smaller details are When you first load up your website, this initial request, since you're trying to load everything you need for all your different routes, this initial request can take a little bit longer. And if that is an issue for what you're trying to accomplish, if that's bad for your user experience, then maybe server-side rendering is better, because those initial requests happen faster. If you don't mind the initial request taking a little bit longer and you want browsing from different sections of your app to be faster, then SPA applications are the way to go. Yeah, so really good question there. React Router does not allow for live updates, but you can use React Router with WebSockets is what would allow us to use live data updates. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can start using, where is it? There we go. How we can add React Router to an application and set up basic routing. So we'll do this. This is pretty easy right here. And then we'll take a little break. So I want you guys to open up a new code sandbox with me and kind of follow along this part here. So we're going to create a React sandbox. And I'll give you guys just a second to get caught up with that. There we go. Okay. Now that you have that open, there are a couple of steps we need to take to get our application ready for routing. So we're going to look at React Routers documentation. And I'll drop the link. Nope, there we go. I'll drop the link for you here. You don't have to follow, you can just watch my video for this part. You don't have to go there to follow along. Okay. I would, in Training Kit, this specific part of the docs, the philosophy is listed as a must read. So hopefully you've had a chance to read this. We're going to just briefly look at it. And if you haven't read it yet, then please, before you start your homework, go in and read this philosophy. So React Router 4 is what we're going to be using. And it's kind of it was a big change from previous versions. So the React team came up with what they call dynamic routing, which is quite different, as they say, from static routing, which has been used a lot more. So Rails, Express, Ember, Angular, they could even put Vue in here. All of the other frameworks, web frameworks that we can use have used static routing. And everything in React Router prior to version 4 was also static routing. And this was pretty common. This still is very common way to set up routes is to have an array with objects that give you the path that you want, gives you the components that you want to show, to render when you're at that path. This is an Angular example, as you can see by the @ng model. And actually, it's straight from their getting started documentation. They do a whole heroes list thing, which is actually a pretty cool way to learn Angular. So this is very common. And it's but it's kind of not very intuitive when we're trying to um, think about building our applications and building out components. You have to have like this whole underwiring thing set up, and yeah, it can kind of it doesn't really make sense when we're trying to build applications with the way of thinking that we've been trying to get our minds started thinking. So that sentence made no sense, but it will in a second. So the backstory: they were frustrated with what React Router was, and they were at a conference in a hotel, and they said, what would it look like if we built the router using the patterns we teach in our workshops? So what is that pattern that they're talking about? Well, they said it just didn't match the mental model React has given us for composing a user interface. So that is what I was trying to say through that jumbled sentence, that old style routing or static routing didn't really match the mental model that we're trying to build with React in composing our user interfaces. So they looked at each other and said, what would it look like if we built the router using the patterns we teach in our workshops, using these React component composing patterns? So they put their heads together, came up with version 4 and dynamic routing. So what that means is routing that takes place as your app is rendering, not in some configuration or something running outside the app like we would normally see, like in this Angular setup here. So keep in mind that with version 4 that we're going to be learning, routing takes place as your app is rendering. So what does that mean? Where does our app render? What is our app rendering, and where is that in our files? So if we look in this React app along the side, let's see what they have done. So first, we're importing Router Browser from this new library, React Router DOM. We're importing a component, and all we're doing is rendering this component when the app actually renders. So where the app is rendering, as the app is rendering, we're going to have our dynamic routing set up. Not under the hood, not some weird wiring that has to take place outside of our application, but actually using components and just rendering right in our application with components. So that's the whole point of their rewrite for version 4, was that, man, we don't have to do all this junk outside of our component. We can just render all of our routes, and we can just use components and just render our routes right inside our app, right where we would have everything else that we teach with React rendering. So this is the magic of React Router 4. And it's kind of mind-blowing that, like, we used to be here, and you think, why did we ever do this when this is just so much more simple and just makes way more sense? So that's a quick background to React Router. Now let's take a look at what it takes to get started with React Router. So let's go to our sandbox and take note that we would add React Router with yarn add, like this. But since we're in Code Sandbox, we're just going to add it here. Okay, so in your sandbox, add React Router DOM. So this is the one we want. We're not going to use React Router. We're going to use React Router DOM. And click on that, and we just yarn added React Router DOM. And there it is in our package.json. Okay, so make sure you have that. And we're going to import the this component that we saw in their example, browser router. So import browser router from React Router DOM. Okay, so take a second to do that. Import browser router from React Router DOM. And then once you have that, we're going to change one little thing. So this is a named export, right? We can't rename this. We have to import it as browser router, and we know that from the curly braces syntax. So these ones we could rename all we want because they're the default exports from the file. But this is a named export, so we have to import browser router. But we're going to, this is very common, we're going to change the name of browser router, and we're going to call it something different in our file. So we're going to import browser router as router. So we have to import it using its name, but we're going to change it and use just router inside our application. And this is really common. Again, I'm teaching this because this is what you'll see in the workforce. So make that little change. Import browser router as router from React Router DOM. Now we're going to take this component that we just imported, and we're going to wrap this app inside this component. So we're going to say router, and then after app, we'll do that. So now we've wrapped our app inside this component that we just imported. And you'll notice as you save it that Code Sandbox wants to rearrange things for you. So it'll do that. All right, cool. So what gives? What's the big point? Why are we doing this? Nothing has changed here. Nothing has changed in our app component. In order to see what this is doing, we have to open this project in a new window and kind of peek under the hood here a little bit. Come on, there we go. Okay, I'm going to go into my React tools, and you'll notice right off the bat that we have browser router is the overall, is the container for my entire application now. Where before, everything we've seen up till now has been app, right? We've just rendered, this has said app, so now we have a new thing wrapping our entire project. So why do we want this? Well, as you click into it, now we have this router component, and then finally we get our app down inside here. So let's click on router, because router is what we are trying to get when we do this. When we wrap our route with this browser router as router component, we're trying to get to this right here. The reason we want this is it has some state on it that we need and some props passed to it that we want to use. So this component, when it was built by the React Router team, was built with, it's passed this history object as its props, and it has this match object on its state. So why do we need these, and why are these important? So right here, we don't have any params right now, but you can see that our match object on the state here gives us the path and the URL that we're at inside our application. So we'll see this build as we build more pages. This will come into play a little bit more. Now let's take a look at this history object. This kind of has some cool stuff. Quite a few functions. We've got go back, go forward, location, push, replace. But we still don't quite understand what the importance of this history object is. So I'm going to open my console at the bottom here, and I'm going to look on the window object, and I'm going to look at window.history. So up here we've got a history object on the router component, and here we've got window.history. So it's a little weird that they're named, that we've got two history objects. And if you look, if you open this up, we've got a lot of things that look really similar. We've got back, forward, go, push state, replace state, replace. So just at first glance, these look really, really similar. And they're built this way because we are hijacking the browser's routing functionality. So instead of our browser running any of these functions like go or back or forward, we can now run them through our React router and do it inside our application instead of inside the browser. And that's what keeps that's what keeps our app from reloading whenever we're trying to route to a new part of our application. So don't worry too much about this. I just want to show you that this is the under the hood setup for our router component here. And we'll get more into the importance of these different things as we learn more about, as we go on today and tomorrow. If there are no questions, I'll check real quick. Oh, got some good questions. After these, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come in and actually build up some new routes and start routing. Our mental model, yes, is thinking in React. So the mental model that we're talking about when we were going over the history of the backstory is just that we want everything broken down into components, and we want to think about our entire application in the context of components. And with routing, it kind of took that away, but with React Router 4, brings that back to us. Yes, we will use React Router DOM, but for today, this is set up for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Hopefully we got this taken care of. Okay, React Router DOM. Thank you, Caitlin. How do you open your console at the bottom? So we can, if you're up here, you can click on this little menu thing here, and you can switch where the console is. If you're trying to do it in Code Sandbox, then just click this little arrow and you can get your console here, since I don't know which console you're referring to. Okay, cool. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back and start building out a pretty fun application. So I'll see you guys in 5 minutes. All right, we are back. Get rid of some of these. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to build an application that lets us render content based on the URL. That is the whole point of React Router, and that's something we need to keep in mind. There's lots of times in our applications that we are rendering content based on some value in our application, right? Kind of like we did with our logins with the InstaClone project. Are you logged in? Then we'll render our feed. Are you not logged in? Okay, we'll render the login page. So sometimes we do that. And sometimes we want to render content based on what is in the URL. So to do that, we are going to, let's create a new directory. So in your code sandbox, create a components directory. And then we're going to create a home.js component. And take a second to build this out, just a basic home component. Okay, I'll give you a second to finish creating your home component. Doesn't have to be anything fancy yet. Okay, then we're going to import that component into our index.js. Now let's render our home component. Oh, but I forgot to export it. Okay, there we go. I will save this and put the link on Slack. So if you guys aren't at this point, then jump on that, fork this sandbox, and follow along with me from here. Okay, so now everybody should be caught up at this point. We have a home component. We have our app being wrapped by our browser router component. And yeah, now we're ready to actually create some routes. So we're going to make our home component a route that shows up at when we're at this slash in our URL. So in this list of things we're pulling from React Router DOM, we're going to now import route. So we want to import browser router as router, then comma route from React Router DOM. And we're going to remove this home component, and we're not going to render it this way. We're going to leave that in charge, or we're going to leave that up to our route. So instead, we're going to render a route component, and we're going to give it a few props. We're going to pass down a few props to this component. So the first thing we want to tell our route component is where and when to render our home route. And we tell it, and we do that by passing down a path prop. So we're going to use path, and that's going to be a string. And the path is going to match whatever is after our base URL. So in this code sandbox, the base URL ends in .codesandbox.io. So whatever is after that is going to be our path. So for our home route, we're just going to tell it to do our path at / right here. So just to recap, we're importing a new component from React Router DOM. We're going to render that DOM, that component here, and we're going to say when we're at the path / we want to render our home component. So another prop that we're going to pass down is going to be the component that we want to render. So it's going to look like this. We're going to say route at path / is going to render the component home. And there we go. We got our home component back up. Woohoo! So our route component takes in these two these two props, a path prop and a component prop. And we're going to render when we're at the route path, when we're at the path / we're going to render our component, our home component. Haha, thank you. Well done. I had you guys trained well. Yeah, this is cool, cool stuff. Let's jump back over here. I'm going to save this. I'm going to jump back over here, and we're going to look at this under the hood again. So we're going to look, okay, we've got our app, we've got our router, we looked at those. Let's look inside our app now. Now we have a new route component with the props component and path passed down to it. Okay, we defined exactly what components were being passed down right here. Path and component, path and component. And then inside our route component, it's going to render our home component. Oh, but look at this. What props are passed down to our home component? Whoa, so we've got some props actually passed down to our home component, but we didn't tell it ever to pass down props, right? We just said, hey, you route component, take in this home component and render it when I'm at this path. It did that, but it also did some other cool stuff for us. It also passed down those different things that we were looking at a little bit earlier. Our match object, our history object, and we even have this new one, location object, which looks like it has some pretty useful stuff here. So we'll get into when we want to use these a little bit later. Any questions on this stuff? Would I be correct in assuming that our routes we are making should be a separate component itself, or will we be doing these in our app 99% of the time? Let's see. Yeah, you can. So most of the time you will build out like a routing component and put that in a separate file. Tomorrow we're going to get into nested routes, where inside our home route, inside our home component, we could actually import route into here and build out some nested routes inside the JSX here. So yeah, that's a good point. We'll separate this out and do into nested components tomorrow. For what we're doing now, we're going to keep everything just here, our routing here inside our index.js. Okay. So now that we've declared one route, let's do another one. Let's say route path Avengers is going to render a new component that we're going to call Avengers list. Okay, we're getting an error because we don't have Avengers list yet, but we're going to make it in just a second. So I want you to build out this path or this route. So when we're at path Avengers, we're actually going to do /Avengers, sorry. When we're at /Avengers, we're going to have our Avengers list component. And I'm going to give you guys a piece of data here. JSON. Okay, this is a list of Avengers. So there you go. You've got a list of Avengers. Copy that. We're going to inside our, not inside our source, but just go to files and create a new directory outside of the source directory. And we'll just call it data. And we'll make a new file called Avengers, call whatever you want, Avengers data.js. And then just paste that list into your data file. And once you have that, we're going to create an Avengers component, Avengers list component. Okay, so Avengers list says, hello, I'm the Avengers list component. And just to make sure it's working, we're going to go back into our index.js and we're going to import Avengers list from that file. Okay, so our app is working again. Don't worry, I'll give you a second to get caught up. Our app's working. Let's just make sure that we can go to this path and see this page here. Hello, I'm the Avengers list component. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go /Avengers. I think that was the path we declared, right? Yep, /Avengers. So I'm going to go type in /Avengers and hit enter. Ah, cool. So we do have a little bit of a problem though. We're getting our Avengers list, but we're also still getting our home component, and we would expect to only see our Avengers list component. So let's peek under the hood real quick, and then we'll see if we can figure out where this is coming from. Okay, so we've got our browser router, and app. We've looked at all of those. Now it looks like we're displaying our home component still up here, our home route, and our Avengers route, right? Somehow we have to make it so that we can only see our Avengers route, because we don't want both of these to be displaying right now. So does anybody have an idea of why this top row is being displayed at this point? Ah, yes, perfect, Patrick. Yep. So this is a good explanation. This is a regex lookup. This slash is also included in the /Avengers, right? So we've told our application, if we're at /, then display the home component. The problem with this is that we are at /, but we just have some extra stuff behind it. So it's still matching right now, even though we've got some extra stuff behind it. So it's still going to display our home component. So what we want to do, as Tom has shown us, is we're going to use a third prop that we can pass down to route called exact. Now remember last week I showed you that if we want to pass down the value true, we don't pass down true like this. We just pass down the word itself, and it will, this evaluates to exact equals true. So we pass down this path, exact now becomes true, and now it's going to look at this string and match and only display our component if it matches exactly. So you can see what happened here. Now at /Avengers, we only have our Avengers list component. So good job, guys. I'm glad you read ahead and were in TK looking at the material for this week. So let's take a look at what happened to our routes here in our React tab. So we're inside our app as we have been. We've got 2 routes. Now we've got our Avengers list, which are this route, which is rendering our Avengers list component. But if you look at this route, it's still listed here, but it's not rendering out the component inside of it. It's just empty inside of it. It's empty inside. That kind of sounds like we should write a song for that, for route being empty inside. Country song, of course. So let's take a look at elements, because this is pretty interesting here. Oh, just kidding. Not doing what I thought it was doing. But you can see in our elements that we have there's not even a mention of our home component. So there's nothing even here. So that component doesn't ever even make it to the DOM when we're at our Avengers endpoint here. Cool stuff, right? Mind blown emojis. Oh, dead inside. Sorry, Casey. Okay, let's build out this Avengers stuff so we can kind of practice what is what we've learned so far, and then we'll take a little break and we'll look at one final thing. So we'll go into Avengers list, and we're going to import our data. So this is the default export. We haven't named it anything inside this file, so we get to name it here. Avengers list from, let's see, is that at source? Yes, one more. Avengers data. Okay, so it looks like that's the correct path there. So now for the next 7-8 minutes, I want you to loop over this Avengers list and create a list of Avengers for this page. I'm going to be doing the same, but I'm going to have a timer up and running as well. We'll say 8 minutes. It looks like we've got some questions. Stop. Yeah, this is a good explanation. So why are we using route within the app component, but using router when rendering to the DOM? What's the difference? That's a really good question. So in our index.js, router is setting up our router. So we're setting up our router system for our app, and a route is a specific route for this component. So what's really cool about React Router 4 is it's very declarative, meaning we can look at this line of code and know exactly what it's doing. So we can look here and say, this route, when it exactly matches the path right here, is going to render the component that's listed inside here. So with these components that we are importing, we can we can just look and see the names, and the way that it's written just tells us what is going on. So this is the router setup for our application. These are routes for their specific paths that are going to display different components. All right, hopefully that helps. Let's see. Where did my timer go? Oh, still up here. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes to build out this component, and don't forget to include prop types if you have any props. Chance to build out your Avengers list. This is what I built. Woohoo! I cheated a little bit. I did the CSS and everything beforehand. So, so when we're here at home, we get our home component. When we go to /Avengers, we see our list of Avengers here. But obviously, this is a very inconvenient way to be browsing through our web application. We don't want our users to be clicking and typing up in the URL. So now what we need to learn is a way to to go from our home component to our Avengers component. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So we're going to go into our index.js, and we're going to bring in one more component called link from React Router DOM. And the list is getting long enough. I'm actually going to drop these down like so. But Code Sandbox doesn't want me to do that. Curse you, Code Sandbox. Okay. So we've got a link component that we're going to use to take us from to new routes. And I lied to you. We're not going to import it here. We're going to go to our home component and import it. Actually, you know what? No, let's keep it here. Let's do this. Let's do like a navigation type bar. And let's say we'll make this a div. And we're going to pass in our link component like that. So I'll drop this down so we can see it a little bit better. So inside this div, we're passing down our link component. This is going to be self-closing, so we can just do that. Now, actually, nope, it's not. Okay. So our link component, let's go here and let's find our link. Our link component is pretty straightforward. We're basically going to say link to, so we're going to pass a to prop, that's a string, link to this URL. So link to, and let's do home here. So we're going to give it the name home inside here, or the word home inside it. And we're going to say when we click on this, we want to link to this URL. And then we're going to make another one for our Avengers. We're going to say when we click on this, we're going to link to /Avengers. So when we click on Avengers, it takes us to our Avengers list. When we click on home, it takes us to our home. So now we can go back and forth. This is way better than typing in the URL. So let's take a look again under the hood. There we go. So we're going to inspect this that we just made. So you'll notice in the elements that we've got the div that we created, right? And these two link components rendered A tags. And that's why they're styled this way. These just look exactly like A tags without any extra styling. So let's check it out in the React. Okay, here we go. So we've got our two routes. Our Avengers route is actually rendering this list, our list of characters, right? And our home route isn't rendering anything because we're not at that path right now. So then our links are, we're passing the to prop down, so you can see to prop is being passed, plus replace. That's just an automatic one that's passed down if we don't. That's a default prop that's passed down if we don't do anything to change that. And then this one, our to, changes. And then, of course, the children is just the word that we typed in here. Because remember, children is what comes in between element tags. Cool. So now we've got that far. Any questions so far with our application? Yay, by making links. Cool. So we've got a couple different choices. If there's not any other questions right now, this is everything you need to know for the project, is everything we've done inside this, this part here. So in TK, though, we've got one extra objective for creating dynamic routes using parameters and the match object. But that doesn't come in, we don't do anything with that until tomorrow's project. So I'm okay to teach this tomorrow, and we can try and build just another quick example of an application with routing, or we can go ahead and jump into this objective and build and do this. So let me ask a poll and see which you guys would like us to do. Yeah, very intuitive, very declarative, as we would say. Yes, I accept. Am I supposed to do poly? Blah, blah, blah. Ah. Okay, so jump into our channel and let me know which you would like to do. And we'll go majority rules. Ooh, neck and neck. This is exciting. Oh man. Okay, now you guys are just messing. Oh. Oh boy. Just flip a coin, yeah, pretty much. Okay, we're split at 15-15. Oh, learn a new objective has pulled ahead. Okay, I know I said that we would take the majority, but since it's so close and so neck to neck, we're going to go with practicing a little bit more. So yeah, we'll do a little bit more with what we have today, and then tomorrow we'll get into creating dynamic routes. Okay. Awesome. So what I would like for you to do is I want you to create a brand new code sandbox, and I want you, I'm gonna make a list of some data for you, and I want you to set up. Okay, so step one, we're just going to, in the index.js, wrap our app in router and create a home route. So I'll put that up on here for you to see. We're creating a new sandbox, and here's your instructions. Step one, wrap app in router and create a home component that is displayed at the route slash. So basically get to that's for, oh, it changed, that's okay. So basically get to where you have a route in here and your app is being wrapped by the router component. You can refer to the sandbox that I dropped in our chat up here, or you can refer to training kit, which has all the steps that you need, starting at add React router to an application. So this should take about 8 minutes. So we'll go about 10 to the hour. Here is what I want you to do next. So step one was to get just your home route displayed. Step two, build out a few more routes and components that will be rendered by those routes. So you can make up what those are. I just put a couple examples here and just put basic content inside each component. But the idea is we want to be able to go to these URLs and see content from that component. That's what I wanted. So I'll build this out with you real quick, and hopefully you got step one finished. So I've added React Router DOM as a dependency, and I'm going to import browser router from that library, but I'm going to call it as router. So if you struggled with this, that's just fine. Follow along with me as I do step 1 and 2 here. From React Router DOM. Now we want to use this component to wrap this app right here. We're wrapping this because we want to give the router functionality the ability to use these different components to our application. Then doing this also brings in the history object, and it gives us the props and the state that we will need for things that we'll learn about more tomorrow. But this is an important step to wrap our app inside our router. Okay, then we want to create a home component. So we're going to create a new directory, components, with a file called home. And we just want to create a simple functional component. And this will be hello from the home component. We can get rid of all this and simply export this component. Okay, so there's our home component. Now what do we do with it in here? So if we want to display our home component as a route, we need to import the route component from React Router DOM, and we're going to display the route component, but we're going to tell it that it is in charge of rendering our home component when it's at the path slash. So now we just need to import home from components slash home. And of course, close our route component. Let's see, that's inside source, components, dot slash. There we go. And there we go, hello from the home component. Let's take away this one. Just display that. Perfect, so let's do one more. Let's do an about.js. And we're just going to copy and paste from our home. We say hello from the about component. Woohoo! Okay, so from our index, we're going to import about from the about folder. And we're going to create a new path, a new route, excuse me, from the path about. Now, don't forget that this will right now show both the home component and the about component. So we need to set up an exact path match for this component. If we by chance wanted to do something like about slash another route, just have something else here, then this would match for both paths, and we'd want to have an exact match on this one. So exact is going to be, you're gonna have to think about which routes you want to have the exact prop passed down to, especially when you get into stuff that we'll get into tomorrow. We can leave it on here. It's not going to hurt anything by doing that. So last thing we want to do, and this wasn't included in one of our steps, but for time's sake, I'm just going to build out 2 links. So we're going to say, we're going to import link, and we're going to build one link that is for home. And we're going to say, when we click on this, we want to go to slash. And then we're going to build out one more link that is for about. And we're going to say, when we go here, we want to go to slash about. And there we go. We can now route between our 2 different components. And now the word about looks really funny in my eyes. Okay, so that is the basics of what we're going to be doing today. And we will look at this other objective tomorrow when it is more relevant to our project. Tomorrow's project is one of our stretches for today. So if you finish today's project and you're working on tomorrow's project, then you'll have to study up on this objective on your own. Okay, so let's take a look at what today's project is. So today's project is React Router Basic Nav. And the topics for today are single page. We're making a single page application like we've done here. We're routing between different views based on the URL and without reloading, without making a call to a server and reloading our page when we get new HTML in. So single page application, we learned the starting points of React Router 4, how to include it into our app and how to set up our basic routes. Then routing and declarative component-based routing, and our path and component props that we put on our route, path and component. So that's the focus for today's project. There is already a lot set up for you. So you'll go into components and you'll see an about.js, contact.js, home.js, and navigation.js. And of course your index page. Let's get back to the project here. You don't need to yarn install React Router for this. It's set up for you. And then after initialize project, you will go through these bullet points. You're going to implement React Router. You're going to declare your routes. And then you're going to set up your navigation using link. This Code Sandbox link is from a past lecture, I think from a few cohorts ago. So just heads up on that. I'll drop the links from my Code Sandbox into our channel for us. Okay, that should be it for today. So if there's not any last questions, and it looks like we're doing, oh, there, let's see. Why doesn't previous visited links turn purple using React Router? Good question. We're going to learn a lot more about links and specifically nav links tomorrow. So I'm going to table these, this question for tomorrow. This hopefully was answered here. So yeah, use styling to make those links look better. Okay. All right, that should be it. So have a great day, and let us know how we can help you, and we will see you guys tomorrow.